All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back again with another spontaneous broadcast. I hope everybody had a good day today, was able to do some good things with themselves. I did this scene here. I shared with you guys that the artwork sort of reflected the reality that was occurring when Diana and Bruce met Diana and Bruce started engaging with Diana. All right. And I was very generic about the sculptures and the art. Well, I was a little bit more specific about, say, for instance, this art right here. But for the most part, the sculpture here and the sculpture here, I didn't actually specifically speak on them. And so this video, in short, is just about speaking a little bit more about the art and how it's a reflection of the characters that we see in this particular scene. And so I just wanted to go into it in a little bit more detail because Zach's a very detailed guy. All right. So I did a little bit more homework and a little bit more research, and I was able to show what each of these individual pieces of art are. So we have here a picture or a painting, and then we have two sculptures here. And it's going to be very interesting as we go into it. I already put this up on social media, so if you guys have seen this before, great. A shout out to each and every one of you. So the first piece of art that we see, my print's very small, but the piece of art we see is actually the Assumption. We already discussed this in the last video. This is the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, where she ascends to heaven, and she's now considered in divinity, right? And that really basically is a reflection of Diana, who is a goddess. So therefore, she also has divinity with her. And so this is a reflection of that. And she's kind of like a saint, mainly because, again, you know, saints typify the values of goodness and that kind of thing. So she's kind of considered like a saint. Now, the interesting parallel between that portrait and Diana is Zach is literally, I mean, this is the cool thing about Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder, and I gotta love him as a Christian. He's literally showing that Diana is a metaphor. She's a metaphor for a saint, a woman saint walking around, like we say, the virtuous woman. And so I always like to advocate to people they read Proverbs 31 on the virtuous woman. And if you kind of read the Proverbs 31, you'll see what I'm talking about. And so just a small little excerpt from that. Who can find a virtuous woman? Her price is above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts in her, that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works willingly with her hands. She's like the merchant. She's like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She rises while there's yet night and gives meat to her household and a portion of her maidens. And she considers a field and buys it with the fruit of her hands, and she plants a vineyard. She girds her loins with strength and strengthens her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good. Her candle does not go out in the night. She lays her hands to the spindle. Her hands hold the distaff. She stretches out her hand to the poor. She reaches forth her hands to the needy. She's not afraid of the snow for her household, or for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes herself, that's royal color. She makes herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes fine linen and sells it, and delivers girdles unto the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and her tongue is the law of kindness. She looks well to the ways of her household, and eats not the bread of idleness. When children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, he praises her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but you excel them all. Favor is deceitful, beauty is vain. But a woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands. Let her own works praise her at the gates. So there's a couple of things that I want to point out there. So the first one is she's kind. Always deals with the oppressed and poor. Never idle. She's always busy doing something. She can work all the way around the clock. Wakes up early, goes to sleep early, so she can work through the night if necessary. Is diligent in business matters. And all these attributes, if you think about it, Diana is that kind of person. Now, she's not a family person in that she's single, whatever. But at the same time, she's that dynamic. She's inspirational. She makes people want to be better, etc., 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 right? And so these qualities of Diana are what you see in the virtuous woman. That's why the backdrop of Diana is the Saint Mary, okay, who has ascended into heaven. That's what that's basically saying. And I love that subtlety that Zack Snyder does, because the camera, what Zack decides to take, how he decides to take his scenes and his shots with his camera really say a lot. And notice that the picture is above Diana. It's literally something that's lit. So the light is actually lighting it and highlighting it. And I thought this is just something just way too non-coincidental. Zack Snyder never takes coincidental shots. And so I was paying attention to that, as well as the female sculpture behind Diana, which we are going to speak about, and the male sculpture behind Bruce Wayne, which we're going to speak about. And as I said before in many video, even in social media, and even on the video that I had, these sculptures, these two sculptures that you're going to see, they literally typify the mindsets of both characters as they're discussing. I love that how when Diana turns to Bruce, the backdrop of her is the sculpture. And when Bruce is talking to Diana, the backdrop of Bruce is this sculpture. I thought it was just a beautiful take by Zack Snyder. There were other artworks in the room, and there's probably a lot more, but I want to go into that in more detail right now. So we talked about the artwork in BVS, and the backdrop is the Virgin Mary, the Assumption. All right. Now this was done by, I know I've talked about this before, but I'm still going to elaborate a little bit on it. This was done by a French woman. So a French woman, a French painter, she actually, there are different people who did versions of it. That is, this is not the exact version. This is just a version of it. But a French painter named Anne-Françoise Louis Jamot, she was the one that did this particular photo, this particular portrait, sorry, of the Assumption of the Virgin. Okay, you can see Mary's levitating up into the sky. The angels are below her, and there are two angels on the side of her. One is playing a harp. Okay. And below that, you can see these angels also making, this was the angel Gabriel greeted her on earth before and told her she was going to have a son. All right. But this portrait here is basically that, if you look at it carefully. This is her levitating in the sky here. She's kind of almost looking like she's seated. On her right is a woman here, and on the left is another woman. You can see the little angel below there and some other heads of what I believe is the apostles. And this is pretty much a good descriptor right here. So here is Mary up above here in heaven. You can see the angels holding her up. She's on some sort of throne. One is playing an instrument. The other one has his hands crossed across his chest, just a symbol of love. You can see also the apostles having the symbol of love. You can see the sainthoods amongst the apostles, and they're looking up into the sky. So basically, this Assumption of the Virgin is done, this particular one, this particular iteration is done by Benzo Gozzoli, right? I know I talked to you guys about this already, but still. And this is the other Assumption. This was done in 1617. Don't know exactly who. And this time she is doing the cross of love there, which I find just very interesting because, that's a popular now symbol, right? We've seen the Wakandans do it. We've seen Diana do it. Who else did it? I can't remember. It's a popular a way of signing things. So the statue in the back, a statue that we saw behind Bruce Wayne, that statue is a statue of Alexander the Great. And it's interesting, the curator, also known as the director of the Gotham Museum, he also commented on Alexander the Great, and he was talking about how he was a pathological killer. He was a psychotic killer. And as a result of that, he believed that he would have tried to get the sword to cut the Gordian knot. And he was saying he was very excited that he had found that sword. Now, this statue in the back here is actually this statue right here. This is, well, not exactly that statue, but there are some replicas of it. And Lysippos, he was the one that actually did the statue of the Alexander the Great around 4 to 3 BC. All right. So this is the statue you're seeing over here. This is the statue here that you're seeing over there. It's an actual statue. It actually exists. And I found that really awesome. Again, realism in the midst of mythos. And again, this gentleman here has actually been director of Institute of Arts, Detroit Institute of Arts. He literally was. So him being the director of a museum makes a lot of sense. And, he actually has a background in that kind of thing. So it's just really interesting to see someone who really is qualified for the job. This kind of realism to these movies, and I love that. Therefore, there's a genuine or authenticness to it. And even though this guy is playing a mythical figure, even so, he is actually that figure is more real because he has been in a position where he's actually acted that role. He's actually had to carry out that role in an institution. So I just find this a fantastic thing, right? And so what do we know about Alexander the Great? Alexander the Great was a great conqueror, and he was kind of the father of modern civilization to some degree. A lot of things we pull from his civilization and his rounding up of different civilizations. However, like the director of the museum said, he was a pathological killer. He would just kill people. He had no problem killing people. Now, there's a lot of superlatives to him because he was kind of the guy that created history. But the truth be told, this guy was, young, tyrannical, crude, and he just knew about brute force. And he didn't live very long. He lived from his 20s to his early 30s, and he died. Some say by poisoning, some say because of illness, because of overdoing it, whatever. But at the end of the day, he died. Okay, he lasted maybe most 10 years. And my point being his reign, at least. And my point being this: Alexander the Great is what Alexander Luthor ascribed to be. But even more interestingly, Batman adopted the policy of Alexander the Great. Any threat to his empire that he felt was a threat, he would destroy it. He would try to eliminate it. And this is what Batman is on. He's on a quest to destroy Superman because he thinks Superman is a threat to the world. And so Alexander the Great and Bruce Wayne have a lot in common. And of course, Alexander Luthor Jr. is also someone who believes in and shares in those common features. So I find this very interesting to share with you guys at this point in time. So when you look at, now there's only one thing that's very interesting here, and that is that if you look at Alexander the Great, he's missing an arm. As you can see here, this one also is missing an arm. And I find that that is ironic. It's like the statue there has been ruined a bit by the lost arm. And that makes sense. And it's his right arm, by the way. And that makes sense because you see, such behavior is self-destructive. You saw Alexander the Great. He, like I said, died early in his life. Now, Bruce Wayne talked about dying early and that he lived a little further down, along the lines than his father did. And that to me is very interesting because what he's basically saying is, I outlived my dad, and he seemed to be happy about that. But at the end of the day, the choices that he was making were leading him down a destructive path, and one in which the whole wide world could have been destroyed. So I can see that Bruce Wayne sort of encapsulates some of the values that Alexander the Great had. And to me, that is a scary take home, because Alexander the Great was destroyed, and so was his entire household. And mainly because he thought he knew the way forward and hadn't consulted with anyone. That's Alexander the Great. He was his own counselor. And that, my friends, is what leads to trouble. Because if you don't have a clear-cut way of how you're going to go about doing things in Hollywood, you'll disappear faster than you say boo. Because they're going to gun for you and then try and sink you. So, anyways, my point being that is Alexander the Great that you see in the background, which is what the curator or director of the museum was saying. Now, here in the background, when Diana and Bruce are talking, in the background we see the statue, the female statue, which is behind Diana. And that female statue is known as Hemera, the goddess of daylight. And I mean, it's basically describing what Diana is going to do to Bruce before the scene is up. He's going to be baffled by her. His mind's going to open up as she talks a little bit more to him. And Diana has a way of transforming people, and she does transform Batman and Bruce by the end of the movie, right? And so Hemera is seen to be the goddess of daylight, brings light to situations. There's not much elaboration on her, which is very interesting. But at the end of the day, this is what Diana acts at, especially to Bruce. It's almost like she's this light bulb that turns on Bruce's head. And that could be a pleasant thing or that could be a terrible thing, you know, depending. But yeah, Diana was all business, and she still was going to enlighten Bruce on certain things. So it's just what it is, I guess. Right? So those are basically the deeper understandings behind it that I wanted to share with you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're already in the chat section and you said hello, great. I'll talk to other guys in the chat section at a later time. Still got that sleepiness because I haven't slept since last night. I did get a little Z's in the middle of the day, but for the most part, I didn't sleep yet. So I hope you guys are having a great day. You guys have a good one.